Hello, darlings. It's your auntie again. Still on our coverage of the recently freed American prisoners from Russia. So, when I was reading it again and listening back, I was like still curious, like how because it's obviously it's top secret, right? Like because things like that, the more you publicize it, the more you like play it out in the media, the lesser the chances are that it would happen. So at least from the like from the transfer point of view, um, the New York Times is actually shedding a little bit more light on what the complex choreography would have been like in in transporting and getting the prisoners ready for their transport. So per again the New York Times, this complex choreography even caught some of the prisoners being freed in their robes and slippers, obviously unaware of where they were going, and some even required forensic experts to make positive identifications. So moving on into the report, per again the New York Times, that the private jet that took off from Southwest Germany on Thursday afternoon was carrying a group that may have never been expected to be confined together. You had police officers, you had doctors, you had intelligence agents, you had a senior aide to Germany's chancellor, and in addition to, there was a convicted Russian assassin in their midst. In the back of that same plane, the assassin that we speak of, Vadim Krasikov, sat with his hands and feet bound and wearing protective headgear. He was not heard uttering a word the entire flight. I don't know how long the flight was, but dang, I hope that he didn't have to pee. I'm sorry, I know that was the first thing that came to mind. I'm sorry. At the same time, a Russian government jet was also headed for Ankara, Turkey's capital, carrying officers from the FSB intelligence agency and 16 prisoners total being released by Russia and Belarus. At one point, it is reported that one of the FSB escorts made what seemed like a bad joke to two of the best known Russian dissidents on board. The joke was, and I quote, "Don't have too much fun out there because Krasikov could come back for you." Unquote. Like, really? Oh dear. Anywho, so this account of the tense hours surrounding the exchange, the biggest between Moscow and the West since the Cold War, I mean, for 24 people total, that's a ton of people, is based on new details revealed by Western government officials involved in the process and on early testimony from the Russian political prisoners released as part of the deal. The swap again freed Mr. Krasikov, the American journalist Evan Gershkovich, and 22 others in a complex 7 country deal. Like the 7 countries had to put their heads together and agree to this deal. I mean, that's 7 countries who have their own interests, right? Who are their own sovereign countries. I mean, they didn't have to do it, but to come together in such a way, it is, I have to say, is I don't think it's ever been historically done, and I could be wrong on this. Um, the complexity of this obviously um, required like intricate planning and timing. I mean, and delicacy, right? Like you had to be delicate and you had to kind of like constantly walk on eggshells, I would say, or even like not even eggshells, but thinner than eggshells. And the successful transfer highlighted the ability of some of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies to cooperate with each other on a distinct operation of shared interest, even as Russia and the West engage in a tense standoff over the war in Ukraine. So last month, CIA officers met with FSB counterparts in Turkey to agree on the final terms of the swap. And again, obviously, this wasn't publicized because honestly, something like this, I don't think would have ever seen the light of day if it was at all. Like, if the media had gotten whiff of this, it would have just fallen apart and all that work would have gone to waste. Further, per the New York Times, the officers met also to plan the logistics, right? The dizzying logistics for how it would actually carry out um, the swap over on the tarmac in Ankara. But even in the final hours, the Western officials said the Americans and Germans worried that something could go wrong. I mean, I would think that. For example, that Russia might not deliver the agreed upon roster of prisoners or swap in lookalikes. Hello, valid, completely. And near the front of the jet carrying Mr. Krasikov from Germany's Karlsruhe airport, the foreign policy advisor to Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Jens Plotner, was going over contingencies with the German team. Forensic experts would visually identify the 13 Russian and German prisoners. I mean, hello, they were not taking any chances to be handed over to Germany, some of whom hadn't been seen in public for years. And this is where that comes in. Because if you haven't seen these people in like so ever many years, you definitely need forensic experts. And in coordination, the American plane bound for Turkey took off from Dulles Airport outside of Washington, D.C., carrying American officials, medical staff, and a psychologist trained to treat the effects of long term captivity. Three Russian prisoners being released by the U.S. were guarded by officers of the Marshal Service. For those being freed by Russia, the day began at Moscow's Lefortovo jail, where they had been gathered from prisons as far away as Siberia. Are you like I just couldn't imagine being in that prison. Oof. Alexandra Skochilenko, imprisoned for opposing the war in Ukraine, had been driven there from St. Petersburg, Russia, along with Andrei Pivovarov, another political prisoner. And when Mr. Pivovarov saw her, she recalled in an interview on Saturday, and he said, all will be well. He told her all will be well because he figured out they would probably be exchanged. And a prison guard had just told her, just get your things Thursday morning. According to her, Miss Kochilenko, she was taken downstairs to a waiting group of FSB agents with their faces covered, who led her onto a bus. Despite the officer insisting they be quiet, the prisoners talked amongst themselves about what else was with them, or who else was with them and who wasn't. Because you've been in prison for that long, you get to know everybody, right? You get to know them by name, and um, you may even become friends with them. So you kind of do like a roll call in your mind. And even after an official announced that, quote, this is a political exchange, unquote, Ms. Kochelenko wasn't ready to believe it because, according to her, she'd been lied to so many times in prison that, again, the thought had crossed her mind that they're driving us to the forest to shoot us. Is that a far fetched thing to think? No, definitely not. And at Moscow's Vnukovo airport, some prisoners boarded the plane wearing only their prison robes. One of them, the opposition politician Ilya Yashin, said all he could bring were a toothbrush, a toothpaste, and his robe. That was all he was allowed to bring. Another, Vladimir Karamurza, appearing at a news conference on Friday with Mr. Yashin, said he traveled in long johns, an undershirt, and rubber shower slippers. Like he totally was like obviously caught off guard, right? And on the plane, there was no food served, even as the accompanying FSB AD and agents in plain clothes snacked on lunches they appeared to have packed from home. The prisoners were not given anything, and the American and German prisoners all appeared to be seated in the business class section of the plane. But she and the other Russian political prisoners were flown economy. And at one point, one of the FSB agents again made a crack that Mr. Krasikov, the assassin, may just be coming back to like you know off with their heads. I mean, it was a joke, but a really bad one. Really, I mean, honestly, so when the plane landed in Ankara in coordination with multiple private jets, the one from Germany, the one from Dulles Airport, the one from Poland, Slovenia, and Norway, because they were also releasing prisoners to Russia. So it's like you can just imagine these planes just kind of like landing together in unison. And then the complexity of like who's gonna open whose plane first. As Western officials and Ms. Kolichenko said, overseeing the operation was Turkey's MIT spy agency, whose chief, Ibrahim Kalin, was monitoring it remotely. On the ground were Turkish agents in dark suits and sunglasses. The American delegation on the tarmac comprised the officials from the White House, FBI, CIA, and the State Department. Among the group was David Cotter, an FBI agent who until recently was the National Security Director for Hostage and Detainee Affairs. Also, with the American team um, was staying in touch with the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan by secure encrypted telephones. The footage of the showed by Russia, released by Russia, showed German officers walking Mr. Krasikov while he was still wearing his helmet, in accordance with typical German practice in the transport of dangerous prisoners to a white bus on the tarmac. The other 7 prisoners being released by the West, as well as the 2 children of the Russian spies. These Russian spies were freed by Slovenia, were taken to the same bus. The 3 released Americans are Mr. Gerskovich, the security contractor Paul Whelan, and the journalist Alsu Kurmasheva were taken onto a second bus. The other 13 prisoners being released by Russia, which included Ms. Kochelenko, Mr. Kara Mirza, Mr. Yashin, and several German nationals, were brought onto a third bus. The German forensic experts then boarded that bus, carrying those freed by Russia to verify their identities. Ms. Kochelenko said one of them asked her name, date of birth, and examined her face from different angles, checking it against photographs of her that appeared to have been printed out from the internet. Can you imagine? She hasn't been seen in that long. Like they had to rely on that. In the immediate time. Once the Americans were certain the Russians had delivered on their end of the deal, they gave signed clemency papers to the 3 Russian prisoners in their custody. The Germans also gave the Turks the green light. Ms. Kochelenko said she watched through the bus window as the Russians being released by the West boarded their plane to Moscow. And as the Russian jet took off quickly, headed back to Vnukovo Airport, where a red carpet welcome by Mr. Putin, obviously, and an honor guard awaited them. Those released by Russia were whisked to a secure airport building where they could finally eat and make brief calls. The swap, again, been so secret that some relatives of the Russian political prisoners were in the dark about whether their loved ones would be freed. And I would not put it past them to think that, it's a ruse. And one of the freed, their husband asked, like, do you realize what's happening? Because I mean, I think until you're like clearly safe and like you could clearly see, I don't know, another flag that is not like a Russian flag, right? Or not Belarusian flag. That is a neutral, if not a country that um, is democratic, I think that's when you begin to breathe. So the three freed American prisoners then boarded a plane, which made its way back to Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, and from there, flown to San Antonio, Texas, to a facility run by the military that specializes in PISA, which is post isolation support activities. They are expected to spend days there under supervision as they try to readjust to normal life. Mr. Plotner, the General Chancellor's aide, told the 13 German and Russian released prisoners they would be flying to Cologne, Germany, and they would be greeted at the airport by Mr. Scholz, provided with German travel documents if necessary, and taken to a military hospital in the nearby city of Koblenz. And in one last precaution, their bags, if they even had any, they were x-rayed before they were loaded onto the plane. And as for Miss Kochelenko, she said that she tried to cry, but that she couldn't. And I'm sure in the days coming, the enormity and of what just happened will start to um, become increasingly clear. And I hope, in the coming days and months and years, the prisoners who were freed would begin to readjust to their normal life, whatever that would look like for them. And I'm very happy again that they are freed. Of course, again, there are a lot more prisoners of wars trapped in different countries elsewhere. Um, so let's continue to hold them in our prayers, remember them, even though we don't know their names, um, because they also have families. And those are families that long for their loved ones as well. So, darlings, that's what we have for this historic and monumental prisoner swap with Russia and our allied countries. So grateful to those who worked on this, grateful for it now being complete, and hoping for a more active discussions with all the other prisoners of war still held in countries elsewhere. I shall talk to you all wonderful darlings later. Stay fabulous and remember to leave grace for others and to continue to journey in gratitude. To leave for now. Bye.